Hi everyone, this is Erica from Lazy Crane Farm, and this is going to be our human geography special. So hopefully I can help some of you review. I know it's pretty late and your exam is coming very quickly, but we have not had much time to do this, so I wanted to make sure that I got it in for you. Give a special shout out to my former students at Freedom High School in Orlando, Florida. I miss you guys. I hope you're all doing great. Please, send me comments or an email at lazycranefarm@gmail.com. I would love to hear from some of you. I know summer's coming, so hopefully you can watch and subscribe to our channel and let me share with you some agriculture knowledge as we hopefully finish up your review. Hi everyone, behind me is a wind turbine, and you can see they're all over the place out here. This is considered renewable energy because it's harnessing the wind in order to produce electricity. They are very large, which is why I wanted to stand in front of one. This is actually in the field across from my dad's field out by the river. So it's very, very large. I'm only 5'3", and I'm not real close to it because we don't own the property, so I don't want to get myself in trouble. But as you can see, it's huge. These are all over the landscape out here because, as you've seen in some of our other videos, if you've been watching, it is very windy out here, and today is no exception. The neat thing about these is that they actually turn to where the wind is. So we can always tell what direction the wind is when we're out at the farm because of the direction that the wind turbines are facing. So when you look at the one back behind me, it is facing to the north and a little bit to the west. So that's how we know where the wind is. It's really easy rather than looking at flags and stuff like that as well. So they do move at the very top and turn those turbines. They are a little bit noisy. This one in specific, my dad says, is a little bit noisy. Some obvious pros are that it is renewable energy, and that's always a good thing, as well as solar is another great one as well. The bad things about this are that there's a shadow, as you can maybe see as it comes across, is that flicker. So if it's too close to a house, people will get that kind of shadowy flicker every time the blades come around. And that can be really frustrating and annoying for people that live by them. Also, the noise can be a problem. And then environmentally, we have some issues with these as well. So environmentally, we have an issue with birds and wildlife. So birds can run into these and it will kill them a lot of times. And that's a huge problem for our wildlife. And then the noise, some of the animals and stuff on the ground don't like that noise. So we've seen them coming into our rural areas, into the towns a little bit more. Because we think they're trying to get away from some of that noise. And then as far as the actual structure and the turbines, it seems that we don't know if they are recyclable. I don't believe that they are, so you can check on that. But what do we do with them when they go bad? We've already seen throughout the area, since there are so many, them replacing some of those blades. And so that's a huge problem. They also, when they brought these structures out, they have, obviously you can see this road here was not here before, so they took some of that ground, but then they also tore up our roads, especially in the rural areas where the roads are not really well kept anyway. So those companies that put these in have had to replace the roads, which is actually nice out here. So the roads are nice and smooth now, but they do take a big toll in a lot of different ways. So you can kind of make up your mind, which way you prefer, but if you needed that for some pros and cons as to renewable energy or an example of wind turbines, this would be a great one. All right, we are out here at my dad's field, and so you can see he's actually just planted the field, and I want to talk real quick about meets and bounds. So the meets and bounds system is simply where you are using different landmarks that are either naturally occurring or something that we put in to tell where your property line is. And I thought of this the other day because we saw the guy that owns the other piece of land next to my dad's, and they were both talking about, well, I don't know where mine ends and yours begins. And so I thought that was kind of funny, and it just, popped in my mind, meets and bounds. So right here you see this post, and they were saying, well, I think it's around the post, but the posts, some posts they said had been moved. And so they kind of guesstimate as to whose line is where. And so that's a great example of meets and bounds. So you can see right where my dad has planted and where he has not planted, the guy next to him. So my dad planted on this side, the guy over there has not planted. And so I found that quite funny. So this post, I believe, is what they are using at this time to determine whose land is whose. They don't have an actual, and somewhere in documents is an actual property boundary, all legalized and all of that, but for, you know, farming and stuff, they don't really seem to care. So they just kind of come out and say, oh, it's around the post. So that's a great example of meets and bounds in case you need it. All right, behind me we have an irrigation system. And so this is going to be used to water the crops. A lot of our irrigation systems out here will be from a well that they have drilled down into the ground, or it could be potentially from a canal or even river where they have that water source. So when you see, this one's actually a little bit smaller than the ones that I've seen in other places, but this was the most easily accessible one. The tires are quite large. These are actually like a track tire, and this system will move through the field on its own on a timer. So this one will happen to go backwards through the field, and then you'll see up here is where we have the actual water coming down and watering those crops. So the question's always, doesn't it ruin some of the crops? The answer is yes. It will run over some of the crops, but most farmers that use these feel that that's worth it to get the water onto the crops, but losing a few is okay, generally speaking, to them, because that's one of those risk-reward situations. So they think it's definitely worth it. So this is an irrigation system that will water the crops. So the first thing I was going to talk to you about is a dispersed rural settlement. So what that means is that you have houses kind of throughout the countryside. So behind me is my grandmother's house. So you can see it's all by itself. There's no other homes next to it. And we actually, our family owns the farmland in front of the house here. And then they also have the farmland behind the house on the other side. So that's a great example of a dispersed rural settlement, because we do own the land with the house and the farmland surrounding it. You can see in the distance over here another house, so you can see it's very far away, and that's part of being a dispersed rural settlement rather than clustered, which everybody would live close together. Behind me we have all of our garden boxes. We are still working on them. Today we'll be actually planting later in the day. So this back here is a great example of market gardening. So what that means is that we're growing fruits and vegetables in order to sell to others. So in our case, there's no one to sell to out in the middle of nowhere, so we'll be taking them into a town or city so that we can sell them there. So again, market gardening, we're growing things in order for us to sell them. That means it's also a good example of commercial agriculture, which means that you are making growing foods and stuff to make a profit. So we would like to hopefully make some money this year. We'll see. We're a little bit weary on what's going to come up, and so we're a little nervous, but more than likely we'll probably do a farmer's market. So where a lot of different people with lots of different products and stuff come together to sell them to the public. So again, this is commercial gardening or commercial agriculture when you are selling it. Over here to my right is my dad's field. He planted corn there this year. I'm sure you'll see that on later videos when it pops up. But that's a great example of commercial. He's straight commercial agriculture. So his only goal is to make money from selling his crop. We will not keep any of that at all. And actually his seeds go all over the place. So some of them will travel down the Mississippi River and go down into Mexico and maybe even down to South America. And I'll talk about that in a little bit as well. The other thing that we're doing here with our boxes and then over in the field as well, we'll actually be doing subsistence agriculture as well. And that's because we are going to keep some of that product for ourselves to consume. We love fruits and vegetables, and we're hoping our families will eat some too and let us know how they taste. But we're wanting to grow our own. And so some of you might have garden boxes and stuff at home in your backyards, and that would be an example of growing it for yourself. We just don't do it on a really large scale, but subsistence farming is simply growing food for yourself. And as you all know, we do see that a lot in sub-Saharan Africa, of course, right? Some of you probably got tired of me saying that all the time this year. So these are a few good examples that you could potentially use for that. So our market gardening, our boxes that we have behind me here, eventually will be full of food, hopefully. And this is an example also of intensive agriculture. That means that we're trying to grow as much as we can in the small space that we do have. I know there's a lot of space out here, okay? But we are in a smaller area, so we're trying to get as much out of that land as we can, and that's intensive agriculture. What my dad does is the same thing. So he plants as much seed as he can into his fields, and that would make it intensive. So you're trying to get as much out of the land as you possibly can. Here in our little area of the farm, we are also going to be doing some organic farming as well. So that means we're not going to be using pesticides and herbicides and things like that. We're going to take the natural approach to all of our food items that we are producing here. So we don't want to, go to the store and buy all the weed killers and all of that. We're going to be out here every day kind of getting the weeds by hand, and then we are going to see, if we have some sort of disease or something, we're going to look for a natural way to fix that instead of just buying chemicals to put on our products. So you may see things at the store labeled USDA organic. That's the United States Department of Agriculture, and they have certified that they are using organic practices on those things. The other thing we are very concerned with here for what we're doing is sustainable agriculture. So that's a big word that you've seen all throughout the year in every single unit in human geography this year. So sustainable. So we're trying to have practices that will produce long-term, but we're also being kind to the soils that we're using and the environment. So we want to be able to sustain this for a long period of time. So we don't want to ruin anything for future generations. So if someday all the apple trees and peach trees and everything we've done out here, when we are old and retiring, someone else should be able to come in and just pick up where we've left off, because it is a sustainable practice then. And that also, I believe, goes along with those organic practices. And you're seeing more and more people switch over to that kind of practice because that's what we kind of need to do. As you know, a lot of pollution in agriculture occurs as well. So we really want to kind of make sure that we're not putting chemicals on our ground here that go into the ground and then potentially into our water. So out here in the country, we are using well water. So that's when they drill down into the earth to find that water source, and then we can pump it up from there. So we don't want those chemicals going into that water that we will potentially use for our plants or that we would use for drinking purposes. All right, everyone, so next thing I'm going to talk to you about real quick are GMOs and hybrid seeds. So in the bucket here, I found some of Dad's soybeans, and these are just, the plain colored ones are simply just regular soybeans that you would plant in the ground. You'll also see some of these pink ones in here. So these have been coated, and I like this one here because you can see this as a shell. So it's been coated with this little pink shell so that it can help to combat some of our pests and stuff in the ground, or that come onto the plants once they develop. So that's a good example of hybrids. So these seeds are all hybrid, which means that the seeds have been manipulated by people to produce a certain way. They also have GMOs, so genetically modified organisms, which means in a lab they have actually specifically changed the DNA of the plant in order to have certain effects. And so that's a little bit of the difference, but a lot of times people just kind of lump the two together into the same category. So hybrids can occur naturally. Some of you that have taken biology will know that information. So you can, you know, cross two different plants together to get a different colored plant. And that's something that's more naturally kind of occurring, and it can happen naturally. But a GMO specifically is made in a lab, manipulating the DNA. A lot of the seeds that are planted, especially out here and across the country, are GMO because they have manipulated them or made them, you know, able to produce more. So on one corn stalk, you might have, instead of one corn cob, you might have multiple corn cobs. And some of that is simply changing that DNA so the plant will actually produce more. And then you get what they call higher yield from that corn. So that would actually obviously help our farmers, because then they're making more money based on less seed. Another common theme that we have in human geography is globalization. So globalization is how we are all kind of interconnected now in the world. So we have that with agriculture as well. It's kind of funny because the other day I was talking to my dad as he is planting for the spring here, his corn and soybeans, and he said, you know, there's not a lot of corn available right now because he ran out of seed and he needed a little bit more. So he talked to his seed guy, and they said, you know, well, we're waiting on seed from South America. So it turns out that a lot of the seed corn that they get up here is from South America. So they are growing the corn down in South America during their summer, their spring and summer season, which is the opposite of ours. So during our winter time, they are the ones growing the corn seeds that we're going to use up here when we switch seasons with them. So they have just harvested it in the fall for them as we are moving through spring and ready to plant up here. So that's a really good example of globalization, because we're depending on those South American farmers to get up here our seeds so that we can plant in the spring here. And who knows, maybe this seed up here goes back down to South America to be planted down there, and it could just be this crazy cycle. A lot of the corn and soybean seeds that we have up here will also be used for livestock. So cows, pigs, chickens, they all eat a lot of corn as a filler. So you might see that in a feedlot, our CAFOs. And so that way they can kind of fatten those animals up a little bit quicker and spend not as much money on doing that, because corn and soybeans are usually not as much. But I do know that some of my dad's seeds do go down the river, which would be the Mississippi River in our area, and they get dispersed out. So even some of the soybeans could go as far as China to help feed that population over there. So we do depend on each other in agriculture, which is a great example of globalization for you guys. All right, everyone, we're going to talk about some of the environmental effects of agriculture. So of course the big one that everybody knows and talks about is pollution. So from the machinery itself, we have some oil that can spill down into the ground. You have, of course, the air pollution that comes from that as well. When we talk about the soil, if you're not doing crop rotation, and crop rotation is when we're doing one crop and then we're switching to another crop the next year, so we can replenish some of the nutrients in the soil to help grow better. And that is something that we're going to practice at our little box garden and our field garden that we're going to have going this year. And I'll talk about that more in other videos. But you want to make sure that you're planting the right crop after another crop, because some of the different plants don't like each other and they don't get along. And then some take certain nutrients from the soil, and then once they're gone, so you need a certain crop to put that back in. So crop rotation is really important. I know my dad usually does corn one year and then soybeans the next, and that's to replenish the soil. Our soils can also have salinization happening, which means that we are having too much salt content into our soil. That's going to happen a lot in coastal areas, simply because they have that ocean breeze and stuff coming in, and with that you have a lot of salt, right, that gets into the soil. You also sometimes see that from certain maybe rivers or canals as well. So the other thing that we can kind of do to combat that, these different pollution effects and all these environmental effects, is to have conservation. And of course use sustainable agricultural practices, of course, which is what everybody seems to be pushing for, which is great. But behind me here, I'm standing here for a reason, there's the nature preserve right across the street from our farm, which is great. Because with that, we also get a lot of wildlife, and we also get the bees, and we need bees for pollination. As in another video you'll see, we talk about all the bumblebees that we've seen on the property here, and bumblebees are so great. They're up in our apple trees right now, pollinating, buzzing around, and we need those pollinators. Some of you may have seen videos where they actually take bees to farms so that they can pollinate for them. A lot of our plants have to have pollination, and those bees are what will do that for us. So without the bees, we might not have a lot of our fruit crops, especially, and some of our nut crops as well. So you do have people that are beekeepers that travel around the country with their bees to help pollinate those areas. But that can also be a bad thing for some of those bees, as they're put into places where maybe they shouldn't be, or could get a disease from that area and take it somewhere else. So we have to keep working on those sustainable practices, and keep, of course, thinking about what we're doing to the land itself. One other thing that we have that is a environmental effect would be desertification. So we have seen this out in the western part of the United States a lot, where we have a lot of water that is, drying up, and so then it's turning into desert. To combat that, in Africa, they have been planting trees right on the edge of the Saharan desert so that they don't continue having more desert there, and they'll hopefully revitalize the area. Out in the western part of the United States, it's a huge problem because they have a lot of irrigation that they use, which is drying everything up. And so when that water is gone, potentially we're going to see more desert kind of encroach in, and you won't be able to grow crops. So that could be a potential big problem out west. All right, this wraps up our special edition from Lazy Crane Farm for Human Geography. I'd like to say good luck to all of you on your exam. I know it's coming up. I hope you all do well. I hope this helps at least some of you. If you have any questions, leave it in the comments below, and please like our video, subscribe, and share. So if you have other friends that need help maybe with agriculture, please share this, and hopefully that will help them as well.